Greetings Mavericks and new viewers. Tonight, direct and live from the Maverick News Network World Studios. This is Maverick News with Rick Walker.
The world is on the edge tonight. Concerns about World War III still escalating as the conflict in Ukraine continues to escalate. But who's to blame? The United Nations is holding emergency talks, an emergency session to deal with the issues. We'll take you to the United Nations emergency meeting. We'll also talk about fear of possible Trump revenge. Oh, and I would be neglectful if I didn't mention this biplane Red Baron style drone attack with a biplane against Russian targets deep inside Russian territory. We'll tell you the truth. Stay with me.
Maverick News. Fighting for freedom.
Okay, let's get right into it. United Nations emergency meeting dealing with the war in Ukraine. Why? Well, that's because Vladimir Putin decided to detonate an intermediate range ballistic missile, one of those Oreshnik hypersonic missiles. Oh, but he says he's not the one escalating things. He says it's the United States. So today he didn't just send him today. Dmitry Polyansky, the Russian ambassador to the United Nations, he was at the table along with these other nations at today's emergency session. And he basically echoed what we've been hearing from Russia. We're warning you. We're warning you. You keep it up and we're going to nuke you. We reserve the right to use these kinds of weapons to defend our country, the mighty Russia, which apparently is so powerful we don't stand a chance anyway, but at the same time, apparently we're the Ukraine, the country that they say can't win the war. Anyway, no chance, but it represents an existential threat to Russia. So here's Mr. Polyansky, who's been on this program. We will give time to everyone to say their piece, and we're going to give him time on the show right now. Here he is.
Facing a irreversible and humiliating defeat that, as demonstrated in the failed Kursk escapade of the Ukrainian head honcho and the clear collapse of the front in Donbass that has been pointed out by all military experts. Even Western news agencies have recognized that just last week alone, Russian troops liberated 235 square kilometers of territory. That is a record for 2024. The most powerful regions are collapsing that were set up by Kiev in 2014. In the ranks of the Ukrainian military, there's clear panic. The forced mobilized soldiers are fleeing en masse from their positions, and lying to his people is something that the actor Zelensky, who has usurped authority in violation of his constitution is finding increasingly difficult. The citizens of Ukraine are fleeing his rule abroad if they're able to do so, or they're holing up at home so they can't be caught by military patrols who are throwing them into bloody battles, irrespective of their age or health. There's another catastrophic trend for the Kiev authorities, the mass return to former Ukrainian territories that are now under the control of Russia, of those people who lived there up until 2022, but decided now, or at the time succumbing to propaganda, to evacuate to the west. Just a few days ago, the Ukrainian authorities said that such returnees are now 150,000 people, and 50,000 of them have come back to Mariupol, which has been rebuilt. Basically, the population of that city has now returned, and this is very indicative. This is shocking information for Zelensky and his clique. But something that's even more shocking is the reasons why people are moving to Russia. This, inter alia, includes the poor treatment from Ukrainian-speaking compatriots, discrimination based on language and faith, the authorities not keeping their promises for socio and economic support, and widespread corruption and a lack of desire to engage in this inhumane regime. In other words, the Ukrainians are rejecting all the glamour of democracy that the sponsors of the Kiev regime are proclaiming so much in their statements. What kind of authority can tolerate this? And let's think about cooperation with the new American administration. The likelihood of who's coming to power is something which Zelensky tried very hard to ignore. He even violated diplomatic niceties. And even if we're to lay to one side the prediction that Donald Trump will cut assistance to Ukraine, which for the Ukrainian army would essentially be a death sentence, it's becoming clearer that he and his team will, in any case, conduct an audit of the assistance provided to Kiev. And this prospect for the main Kiev corrupt boss and its subordinates is the most frightening scenario, because over some 3 years now, they have plundered so much that the Western experts' hair is standing on its end. In the UK press last week, there was a publication about theft by Ukrainian civil servants directly linked to the office of the Ukrainian president, involved in so-called restoration of the Ukrainian energy infrastructure. The reports talk about a number of mega corrupt officials who are claiming that Russian strikes on these facilities means that war writes everything off. But this corruption and money laundering in the army is something that Ukrainian servicemen are always complaining about, and it's increasingly difficult for the authorities to be quiet about this. It's clear that many defense companies who on paper have received millions of dollars don't actually exist in actual fact. The former Labour Minister of Poland, Piotr Kulpa, in an interview admitted that about 30 to 50% of Western assistance to Ukraine has been plundered right from the beginning and consistently. From these resources, according to him, really equated to the annual budget of Ukraine. And quite clearly, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Can you imagine what scale of theft that we're talking about, sanctioned and backed from the very top? It is not surprising that the Ukrainian authorities are not taking any steps to conduct any audit whatsoever. And the only way of doing this is to provoke an escalation whereby all of these other things seem to be trifling in comparison. And the outgoing American administration is actively egging it on in doing this, and it's trying as much as it can to make a mess both in Russia and with the new team in the White House. There's nothing surprising here. It takes two to tango, so to speak, in international corruption, and therefore the Biden team most likely really doesn't want to engage in financial checks. Therefore, that is the reason for all this fear-mongering regarding North Korean troops, just like it was previously with
We're going to get into the North
missiles.
Korean troops here in a while.
It's interesting what the West is going to come up with next. Maybe there's going to be Martians or little green aliens. It doesn't really matter. The main thing is to make an accusation. Distinguished colleagues, it's possible that these maneuvers of the Ukrainian corruptioneers and their Western conspirators might have gone unnoticed if, trying to destroy their tracks, they had not challenged peace throughout the whole world and had not, irrespective of what country you live in, placed the world on the brink of a global nuclear conflict. This is precisely what happened after the Biden administration and right after many of its European satellites authorized the Ukrainian army to use long-range missiles far inside Russia, and Zelensky has engaged in this. We saw this because we've had 2 rounds of such strikes. On the 19th of November, 6 ATACMS missile attacks that were made in the US were used, and on the 21st of November there was a combined missile attack with a Storm Shadow made in the UK and the HIMARS in the US. They struck military targets in Bryansk and Kursk. They did not achieve their targets thanks to our anti-missile defense. However, as we've repeatedly underscored, the West, from that moment, provoked a regional conflict in Ukraine that has now taken on a global nature. In response to the use of American and UK long-range weapons on the 21st of November, the Russian armed forces conducted a combined strike on a military-industrial complex in Ukraine. For the first time, a new IRBM Russian missile system was used with non-nuclear hypersonic equipment. The effectiveness of such weaponry that has no analogy is something that Western specialists can tell you about. Did not take on board our warning and decided once again to test our resolve. Yesterday, on the 25th of November, the Russian Defense Ministry said that over the past 3 days, the Ukrainian army struck using Western missiles in Kursk region and used 12 ATACMS missiles, and most of them exploded. However, there was not any major casualties. What else can we say? Well, let's just wait and see. Every wave of escalation from the West is going to be decisively responded to. I will be frank. We believe that it is our right to use our weapons against military facilities of those countries who allow the use of weapons against our facilities. So we're talking about the hypersonic weaponry today. There is the American anti-missile defense system in Europe. They cannot capture these, and we've warned you about this, but you've made your choice. We have said repeatedly that we are prepared to engage in negotiations. We have put forward specific proposals, and most recently in June this year. However, the Kiev head honcho and the West, time after time, have favored escalation. So is that your deliberate decision? Well, then it is completely shocking. Distinguished colleagues, in our opinion, this deliberate escalation from the US and its allies is something that we should be discussing today in the Security Council, because the global conflict that they are likely to provoke with today's weaponry is not going to spare anyone. The representative of the Kiev regime, of course, is not going to say anything about this, because all Ukrainian diplomacy wants to do right now is save the skin of Zelensky and its clique. And even if that means plunging the whole world into war, we would urge each and every one of you to think about this and not to make the mistake, and to choose your priorities very carefully. Thank you very much indeed.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement.
Poor little Putin. He's the victim. I try to be objective and unbiased, but facts are facts. You can see it any way you want, but if launching a new kind of weapon, a hypersonic missile that is destabilizing because it gives Russia first-strike capability that can't be stopped. If that isn't escalation, like actually using it on a target where people are killed inside Ukraine, if that isn't escalation, I don't know what escalation is. That's the very definition of escalation. You're leapfrogging over different stages of escalation to get to that point, and threatening beyond that to use that technology, that kind of weapon, against targets in Europe. If that isn't escalation, I don't know what is. But you're welcome to look at it any way you want. You can share your thoughts in the chat, and I'm sure that many of you probably are already. We're going to talk as well about, he's talking about corruption, about money being stolen, laundered, blah, blah, blah. There's probably some of that going on. To what degree, I don't know, but he's making these accusations with no real proof of anything. He's just making accusations, then saying that's what the US and NATO and Ukraine are doing to Russia, just making accusations with nothing to back it up. But where's the proof? I see a lot of propaganda in that regard online about Zelensky buying casinos and yachts, foreign villas, multi-million-dollar estates, all of which is proven to be false, all of it coming from pro-Russian propaganda sites. I've looked into it. Those are accusations, and what he's saying right there flows right into that. And then talks about propaganda. I don't know. I'm just throwing out facts and factual observations. This is what I have seen, and what I'm sharing with you is just factual information. It's not like I'm making it up. I'm not. And I'm going to be equally critical of Biden and the U.S. when they're out of line too. And I'm going to get into this biplane attack against Russia over the past day. We'll get into the truth on that matter too. But let's go back to the United Nations. Let's give some other people a voice here as well, and then you can make your own assessment. They'll lay out their own arguments. I don't have to speak for any of them, and I'm not really here to defend anybody. I'm just laying it out. Shoot the messenger if you want, but I'm not going to sit here and cheerlead for Vladimir Putin, especially when some of the things that are being said are just demonstrably not true. We're also going to get into the truth about sanctions, about the state of the Russian economy, and we'll tell you about the Russian ruble crashing today. All this while we've been told that the Russian economy is so robust, so strong, that the sanctions, he says, Putin says the sanctions make Russia stronger. Well, we'll see about that when we start laying out the stats later in the broadcast. But let's go back to the UN and get some of the other perspectives on this today from other nations who have skin in the game.
Colleagues, last week we marked 1,000 days since Russia launched its illegal, full-scale invasion of Ukraine. We recalled the devastating impact the war has had upon the Ukrainian people and the world, and reiterated our steadfast commitment to ensuring Ukraine gets the support it needs to defend itself and to achieve a just and lasting peace in line with the UN Charter. President Putin has demonstrated time and again that he has no interest in such a peace. In recent weeks and months, Russia has intensified its attacks on Ukraine. First, it has stepped up the use of indiscriminate glide bombs against Ukrainian cities. Last week, the UN announced that the number of civilians killed since February 2022 had reached over 10,000, with over 18,500 injured. Second, Russia has intensified its deliberate targeting of civilian energy infrastructure. This is a war crime, and it puts the lives of millions of Ukrainians at serious risk during cold winter months. Third, Russia has used experimental weapons. Last week, it fired an intermediate-range ballistic missile on Dnipro. Ukraine is not a testing ground for new weapons. I could go on, but this pattern of reckless activity by Russia serves only to prolong the war and the suffering of Ukrainian people, whilst posing serious risks to international peace and security. There is only one aggressor here, and only one country in breach of the Charter. To seek de-escalation, we must focus on deterring Russia from that aggression. No one wants peace more than Ukraine. But Ukraine needs to be able to defend its civilians from these brutal attacks. Ukraine has a right to self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter, and we will support them in their efforts to achieve a sustainable peace. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the representative of Ukraine.
Well, thank you, Madam President. Distinguished members of the Security Council, Assistant Secretary General Yencha. I also recognize here the residual presence of Putin's envoys in the permanent seat of the Soviet Union. I would like to thank the Ukraine presidency for convening this meeting that Ukraine requested in response to Russia's recent escalatory actions. These include the first use of an intermediate-range ballistic missile to strike the Ukrainian city of Dnipro and the use of DPRK troops in its war against Ukraine. The ongoing deployment of DPRK troops to support Russia remains one of the clearest indicators of Moscow's unwillingness to de-escalate, alongside the weapons supplies Russia has been receiving from Pyongyang for over a year. Since the Council's most recent discussion, the situation on the ground has escalated, and first clashes of the Ukrainian forces against DPRK servicemen already took place. As we informed earlier, the troops are fighting under assumed identities of Russia's Far East nationalities using forged documents. Primarily, they operate as combined arms units trained for action in the European theater of military operations. The DPRK is now entering the war in a fully fledged manner. According to available information, its current military contingent of 11,000 troops could quickly be increased to 100,000. The question of whether the Pyongyang regime truly requires such a substantial number of combat-trained servicemen solely to assist its Russian allies is rhetorical at best. The answer to this question is self-evident, and while it may be uncomfortable, acknowledging this reality is essential. Otherwise, an appropriate and adequate response would be unlikely. According to the publicly available information, the DPRK had sent more than 20,000 containers of artillery, missiles, and other conventional arms to Russia since August 2023 to replenish its dwindling weapons stockpiles. As reported by Ukraine's military defense intelligence, Pyongyang has supplied Moscow with 100 Kan-23 and Kan-24 short-range ballistic missiles. The first use of these weapons by Russia against Ukraine, including against residential areas and civilian infrastructure, was recorded at the end of 2023. In 2024, Ukraine has documented approximately 60 launches of such missiles, accounting for 1/3 of all ballistic missile attacks carried out by Russia this year. Furthermore, recent reports from the expert community point to satellite images that reveal the DPRK is expanding a manufacturing complex in the city of Hamhung. This industrial facility assembles KN-23 short-range ballistic missiles, which Russia has used against Ukraine, including for targeting residential areas and civilian infrastructure. The satellite images reportedly taken in early October show the construction of what appears to be an additional assembly building, as well as a new housing facility likely intended for workers. Additionally, there have been recent reports that Russia received 170mm self-propelled howitzers and 240mm multiple rocket launch systems from the DPRK. Let me recall that the transfer of ballistic missiles, along with any other arms and related material from the DPRK to Russia, flagrantly violates multiple United Nations Security Council resolutions. The training by the Russian Federation of DPRK regular units, including those recently deployed in the Kursk region, constitutes a violation of Security Council Resolutions 1718, 1874, and 2270. In turn, DPRK soldiers providing or receiving any training or other assistance related to use of arms is also a violation of the mentioned resolutions. We reiterate that Pyongyang's support comes at a price, and this is an access to Russian technology in missile, nuclear, and other military programs. It is crucial to understand that this price is paid not so much by Russia, but by the world. Failure to act decisively will be far more costly in the long run than taking strong and timely measures today. We call on all responsible nations to take immediate actions to resolutely counterattack the Russian and North Korean regimes, from increasing sanctions pressure on Moscow and Pyongyang to maximizing Ukraine's capabilities within the framework of the victory plan presented by President Zelensky. At the same time, the Security Council and its 1718 Sanctions Committee should continue addressing the issue of non-compliance of the DPRK and the Russian Federation with relevant UN Security Council resolutions. In this regard, Ukraine also supports the monitoring and reporting on violations and evasions of the sanction measures by both regimes within other multilateral mechanisms, in particular multilateral sanctions monitoring team established on October 16, 2024. Madam President, another escalatory move by Putin aimed at testing the world's resilience to Russia's nuclear blackmail occurred on November 21. On that day, the Ukrainian city of Dnipro suffered an attack by an intermediate-range ballistic missile capable of delivering weapons of mass destruction. According to an initial examination of remnants, it was the first time that such a missile has been identified on the territory of Ukraine. The missile was equipped with 6 warheads, each containing 6 sub-munitions. It moved along a ballistic trajectory which was only affected by aerodynamic resistance. Moscow's narratives following the strike, including comments by war criminal Putin, once again underscored Russia's intentions to persuade the global audience of its complete inadequacy, this time by showing readiness to kill Ukrainians not only with conventional but also nuclear means. Ukraine calls on UN member states, in particular nuclear weapon states, to condemn Russia's irresponsible nuclear saber-rattling. In responding to this escalatory step, it is also important to remember that Putin's future actions will directly depend on the strength and resolve of our reaction. In effect, this modus operandi has always been simple and straightforward. If his blackmail succeeds and his opponent shows weakness or willingness to appease, a new and more severe escalation of violence and violations will inevitably follow. On the contrary, if adequate measures to deter Russia and reduce its aggressive potential are taken, Putin will stop. Therefore, the response to the Kremlin's current nuclear blackmail and threats must include tougher sanctions and increased military assistance to the party defending itself, its people, and the principles of the UN Charter. In this context, we do not accept concerns about strengthening Ukraine's capacities to strike military targets on Russian territory as alleged escalation. Such labeling either demonstrates a complete misunderstanding of conflict's nature and current developments on the ground, or serves as manipulation in the aggressor's interests. It was from Russian territory that the full-scale invasion began in February 2022. It is on Russian territory that new military units were being formed to occupy and destroy Ukrainian cities and kill Ukrainian people. It is on Russian territory that the production of deadly weapons is accelerating. Weapons that will be used not only against Ukraine, despite the illusions of those hoping to buy a few years of peace at the expense of Ukraine's existence. Finally, it is from Russian territory that missiles, drones, and guided aerial bombs are launched daily, killing Ukrainians and destroying our critical infrastructure. This includes drones from Iran and missiles from the DPRK, enabling these rogue states to test their weaponry. More than 11,500 missiles were launched against Ukraine since February 2022. More than 33,000 guided aerial bombs were deployed. Over the past 4 days alone, 495 UAVs were launched by Russia, along with Iskander ballistic missiles and KH-5969 guided air-to-surface missiles. Among the targets that Russian forces attempt to strike are the transmission substations of our nuclear power plants. Following the Russian attack on November 17, the IAEA Director General stated that several electrical substations on which the NPPs depend had suffered further damage. In addition, the main power lines from 4 of the substations were disconnected. This poses a real and immediate threat to nuclear safety and security, not only for Ukraine, but for the entire continent. Strikes on Russian territory help reducing such war-related threats. Unlike Russia, Ukraine does not target residential areas, hospitals, or civilian infrastructure. Our goal is not to intimidate the Russian civilian population, but to weaken the ability of the Kremlin regime to threaten Ukraine and the world. Russian military command posts, airfields, artillery arsenals, missile deployment sites were among the most recent targets hit by the Ukrainian forces. Every target struck means a Ukrainian life saved, somebody's home or power station preserved. Ukraine will continue to exercise its inherent right to self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter. This right, I remind you, does not impose geographical limitations on defending against an armed attack. At the same time, Article 51 does not allow an aggressor to hide its violations under the guise of the right to self-defense, as self-defense applies in cases where an armed attack occurs or is imminent. In February 2022, as we all remember, the qualification of imminent was only applied to Russia's plans to invade Ukraine. The plans that Russia denied in this very chamber a week before the invasion at the level of its deputy foreign minister. Russia must understand that its every attempt to expand the war will have consequences. This serves to sober the aggressor state, disrupts its plans, and enforce it toward peace. A comprehensive, just, and lasting peace based on the UN Charter, not on deceitful appeasement reminiscent of Munich 1938. The former could be achieved through two things: helping Ukraine and increasing pressure on Russia, and if the latter prevails, the price for all of us would be far too high. One speaker today has said that he cannot help but wonder, can those caught in the war be reunited with their families? Is there anyone they can be thankful for? Can they have a happy and peaceful tomorrow? End of quote. The answer is yes. There are 141 countries in the General Assembly they can be thankful for. The countries who voted for the condemnation of the Russian aggression in March 2022. The answer is yes. There are 141 countries they can be thankful for who call a spade, who voted in February 2023 for the resolution on the principles of the UN Charter underlying just, comprehensive, and lasting peace in Ukraine, including Ukraine's territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. Yes, they can be thankful to dozens of countries that help Ukraine with air defense systems, with means to destroy military bases in Russia, where hundreds of missiles are launched to kill Ukrainian children, women, and men. And I want to conclude with my profound gratitude to all those countries that have been supporting Ukraine through almost 3 years of this bloody war. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ukraine for their statement.
Well, okay, let's take a little break. I'll be right back on the other side.
He's a fighter. He's a survivor. President Trump, defiant, strong. He is determined to make America great again. Pay tribute to the 45th President of the United States with this collectible t-shirt from the Maverick News Memorable Moments collection. Even a would-be assassin's bullet could not stop him. Instead, he emerged with his fist in the air ready to fight. For freedom. Get your Trump Fighting for Freedom t-shirt with any donation of $30 or more to Maverick News. There are 2 iconic artistic designs to choose from. But there is only one way to get these. Donate at freedomreporters.com. Support free speech. Free media. Support Maverick News. Call 1-866-248-1490 or order online at supergeeks.tv.
I said, long time ago, acknowledged that the sanctions put on Russia by the United States had largely not worked. And we've had people like Kevin Michelizzi on the program who indicated, you know, as he's living in Crimea, saying these sanctions are not having an impact on the economy, at least not to the degree that the United States was saying they would. And I think largely that has been true over the past 2.5, almost 3 years since the beginning of Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Not talking about it, you know, the way things started way back even before that when Russia took Crimea and went into the Donbass. That's, you know, prior to, and there were sanctions imposed at that point too. But you know why those sanctions never really had that much impact? It's because there were exemptions. They were sanctions, but they weren't really sanctions. They were sanctions against oil and gas, but there were ways for Russia to get around the sanctions so that they could still deliver gas, either directly or indirectly, to the European market, because banks like Gazprom Bank were exempted. They were allowed to continue to conduct financial activities and allow the exchange of funds so that the oil could continue to flow to European countries like Germany. And so the effects of the sanctions were kind of minimal, and people were not really aware. People didn't really know. It just looked like the sanctions weren't working. In reality, there has been ongoing concern in the West about the effects of possible escalation. So the West's really been taking, the United States, NATO, they really, if you sit back and you take an objective look, as I've tried to, this is my assessment. If you really look at it, NATO has been taking a responsive posture, reactionary, not escalatory. They've been worried about escalation. Everything they've been doing has been a step forward with real caution. Even on the sanctions side, because there were concerns that Russia might respond in some dramatic fashion if the sanctions were too harsh. Well, things changed just recently with the Biden administration, and they tightened up those sanctions. Now, when the sanctions were first put on, there was some impact on the economy, and you saw a lot of Western countries leaving, like companies, corporations like McDonald's leaving Russia. Car companies leave Russia, American or Western-based car companies leave Russia. So that definitely had an impact on the economy in that way. That's why when Tucker Carlson went to Russia to interview Putin, where did he go? He went to what was a McDonald's, and I would call it burger clone, where it's like fake McDonald's, but it's the Russian version. It's the same thing. They've just got a new name. And that's why the impact, even from that, the exodus of American companies, the impact from that was minimal. Plus, Putin was charging an exit tax that was extremely painful for any company that decided to comply with U.S. sanctions and hightail it out of there. The bottom line is, the sanctions were having a minimal effect before, but now, today, boy, how things have changed. Today, the Russian ruble plummeted to its lowest point since March of 2022, trading at over 113 rubles to the US dollar. That significant drop marks a new chapter in the ongoing economic turmoil within Russia, exacerbated by recent U.S. sanctions targeting major Russian financial institutions like Gazprom Bank. The Central Bank of Russia has responded by suspending its planned purchases of foreign currency until the end of the year, until 2025, in an attempt to stabilize the situation. The Russian Central Bank had to step in today and take action to stop the free fall of the Russian ruble. Are you hearing what I'm saying? This is major. This is a major crash of the Russian currency. We keep hearing about how the Western economies are so fragile. And a lot of that, I would suggest to you, is partially true, but mostly propaganda these days, designed to undermine confidence in our financial institutions, in our economic system, in our governments, in our policies, our economic policies, and I could go on. Now, the ruble's decline is also attributed to increased military spending and the broader impact of international sanctions, which we've been talking about here, which have disrupted trade and financial flows. So this currency crisis is not just a number on a screen, folks. It directly affects the purchasing power of ordinary Russians, making imports more expensive and potentially fueling inflation. Not just potentially, it is fueling inflation. It has been fueling inflation. We talked about inflation here on this program last night, and we've got inflation pretty bad right here in Canada and in the United States. But over in Russia, all the stats that I've been digging up over the past 24 hours, researching this, and these are numbers. The numbers don't lie. It's much, 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 much worse in Russia. And some people, some influencers are trying to sugarcoat this over there, but it's not a good situation. The economy in Russia is on shaky ground. That alone is backing Putin into a corner. Now, you can talk all you want about the Storm Shadow missiles, the ATACMS, and the Scalp missiles, but the economy is the cornerstone of any war effort. That's also why we saw this past week, over the weekend, the NATO summit in Montreal. They said that the people involved in the NATO summit there, they were sending a very clear message to the private sector that it's time to ramp up and get ready and get everything in line for a wartime economy. That was one of the main messages that came out of everything that was happening there at that NATO summit over the weekend. Not to say that we're absolutely going to be involved in a full-blown kinetic Third World War that will require that, but NATO leaders are telling everyone we better be prepared, better to be ready and not need it than, as was the case, say, in World War I, where you have to play catch up. It's better to have it and not end up using it. Otherwise, especially today, as things escalate, they will escalate very, very quickly. We've been frogs in a boiling pot of water up to this point. But when this thing pops off, if it pops off, and I hope it doesn't pop off, but if it does, everything will escalate extremely quickly. And if we are not in a position to defend ourselves, regardless of the circumstances surrounding the origin or the cause of the world conflict, if we're not in a position to defend ourselves, we will be very, very sorry. I guarantee that. And the United States is not as prepared today as it was, say, under Reagan during his time in the White House. Because back then, he built things up to the point where the U.S. had something like over 600 ships. Today, only just over 200. There has been a degree of complacency among NATO countries, the United States, especially since the fall of the Soviet Union. And so the U.S. military, NATO, has actually been shrinking. That's why these NATO countries discussed at the summit in Montreal on the weekend. One of the main subjects also, how much of the GDP of each nation is being devoted to military spending, to NATO expenditures. That's been one of the main concerns of Donald Trump, even in his previous incarnation as president, and I'm sure it will be again now. He wants the European countries to pay their fair share within NATO so that the United States isn't just giving everyone a free ride. Now, I don't think that this situation in Ukraine, with regard to Trump, is simply a situation where he's just going to pull the rug out from underneath Ukraine. I think what he's really trying to do here, ultimately, and this is just me speculating to some degree because I'm not in Donald Trump's head, but based on his past actions as president, I think this is a lot of leveraging and posturing to get NATO countries to step up to the plate and really cough up the cash, which they're already preparing to do, because prior to Trump coming into office, I know that there were meetings being conducted in Europe where NATO countries have been taking steps to sort of Trump-proof the Ukrainian war effort in the event that the United States under Trump does pull funding for Ukraine. And you can see at every step now, at the UN today, with Dmitry Polyansky, with Sergei Lavrov, with Putin himself, and the statements that even Putin made during the election, where it was very clear that he wanted Donald Trump to win, they are in a way, I think, banking on Donald Trump and his administration. I think they're very hopeful that Trump will come in and they'll be the tail that wags the dog, and they will dictate to Trump somehow, some way. They seem to feel like they have some leverage over him to get him to just abandon Ukraine and hand it all over, to simply capitulate. And as concerns that maybe he won't do that persist, we see a situation where Trump is being accused of lying to the public, even with regard to what's going on in Gaza. Now, I don't think Trump lied to anybody. If you really watched all of his various speeches, Trump himself, I think he's kind of telegraphing what he was going to do. And you shouldn't take everything that he has said literally. There's some coding in there. So I can't predict exactly what's going to happen. But I think even Trump, though, this bluster about ending the war in a day, I guess we'll see. But this currency crisis, too, this gives the United States, NATO, other affected countries, including Ukraine, some leverage at the bargaining table. And they will be getting to the bargaining table with Trump. And the use of these ATACMS missiles, along with the Storm Shadows and the Scalp missiles, that all also gives leverage to the Ukrainian side of the equation as we head into these negotiations, and they are going to happen. Now, some people are sitting there saying, that the Biden administration is just trying to escalate things and make things spiral out of control to draw the United States into a world conflict, a third world war before Trump takes office. I guess you could assess it that way. It is what it is. My assessment, though, is that is the Biden administration giving Trump a negotiating gift prior to having him take office. They're putting all of these other tools on the table, which Trump can then use as bargaining chips when he sits down with Putin. If he so chooses to use them, he can either leave them in place and not take personal responsibility for these measures being there, or he can take them away. But he in himself doesn't have full control over whether Ukraine can fire Storm Shadow missiles. Those come from the UK. Or Scalp missiles, those come from France. The United States is not the only country involved in this. And these other countries surrounding Russia, including Poland, which is a NATO country, they have skin in the game too. Let's go back to the UN now and get Poland's position on this today. Here we go, back to the UN.
For his briefing. As it was mentioned just last week, we gathered in this council to mark the milestone of the 1,000 days since Russia's unprovoked and brutal invasion of Ukraine. This sobering anniversary should have served as a wake-up call to the international community. Yet, Russia, undeterred, has chosen to escalate the conflict further, demonstrating a blatant disregard for international law and human life. Furthermore, Russia's increasingly active support from other states is transforming this war into a collective act of aggression. Madam President, Russia has intensified its aggression against Ukraine through a combination of verbal threats and military actions. The recent attacks against Dnipro on November 21st, targeting Ukrainian civilians and civilian infrastructure, with the use of the modified RS-26 Ruble intermediate-range ballistic missiles Oreshnik, capable of carrying nuclear warheads, represents a new level of danger in the conflict with Ukraine. This move, coupled with the revision of Russia's nuclear doctrine, constitutes another instance of nuclear saber-rattling, further undermining the global security architecture. Such behavior not only threatens the stability of Ukraine and the region, but also increases the risk of wider conflict and nuclear proliferation. The Kremlin's aim is clear: to intimidate Ukraine and its supporters and sway public opinion to deter international support, but this will not happen. The international community must send a clear message to Russia: its nuclear threats will not be tolerated. Poland strongly opposes and deplores such reckless actions, calling on Russia to cease its aggression, withdraw its troops from internationally recognized territory of Ukraine, and return to the path of diplomacy. We reiterate that Ukraine's defensive operations to diminish Russia's capacity to wage its illegal war are a legitimate exercise of an inherent right to self-defense, fully in line with the international law and Article 51 of the UN Charter. In contrast, Russia, as an aggressor, continues to violate fundamental principles of international law, including the prohibition of the use of force against the territorial integrity and sovereignty of any state and international humanitarian law. Russian authorities and soldiers must be held accountable for all crimes committed in Ukraine. If they go unpunished by international justice, aggressive Moscow could inspire other actors to replace international law with the might makes right approach. This could lead to a world where coercion and intimidation replace peaceful negotiations and time-consuming reconciliation in every region. Madam President, any further peace must be grounded on the UN Charter and international law and must be negotiated and agreed upon by Ukraine. We believe that the President Zelensky's peace formula currently best embodies these principles, and I thank you.
I thank the representative of Poland for their statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Stavros Lambrinidis, head of the delegation of the European Union to the United Nations.
All right, let's stick with this.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. I want to thank you for organizing this meeting, and also special thanks to Jerzy Janša for his briefing. Colleagues, only last week we marked 1,000 days since Russia's unprovoked and unjustified full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I delivered a statement at that occasion in front of this chamber on behalf of the EU and its member states again. And today we are compelled to meet once again after Russia once again stepped up its offensive with a new wave of escalations. The past days, Russia has intensified its massive aerial assaults against Ukrainian cities, once again killing innocent civilians, including children. It has once again inflicted further damage on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, also endangering nuclear safety and security, as nuclear sites need a secure off-site power supply. It has once again expanded its use of arms, firing a new ballistic missile against Dnipro. And it has once again deepened its military cooperation with the DPRK, now deploying thousands of North Korean troops to support its war of aggression in violation of UNSC resolutions. Dear colleagues, each of these actions separately constitute once again unacceptable escalations and serious breaches of international law. Russia must be held fully accountable for its violations. The world counts on all Council members to defend international law, to seize any and all assistance to Russia's war of aggression, and to assist Ukraine in achieving a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace. Might cannot make right. We can never accept attempts to change borders by force. Territorial integrity is at the core of the UN Charter, and it must be upheld. So, once again, we will continue to support Ukraine to defend the UN Charter in response to Russia's aggression, and we will do so for as long as it takes. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Lambrinidis for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Estonia.
We'll stay here because he's going to speak
Thank
for
you
a
very
number
much,
of
President.
countries.
I have the honor to speak on behalf of the three Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and my own country, Estonia. We align ourselves with a statement of the European Union. Let me add a few additional elements. First of all, I would like to thank SG Janša for his briefing. Thank you. President, criminal Russia's regime, instead of opting to de-escalate and to end this war, it calls and to call of the international community to find a peaceful end to this war, has again decided to pursue escalation in Ukraine, exemplified by Russia's launching a record amount of drone strikes into Ukraine during the past days, in which energy infrastructure, including of the nuclear power plants infrastructure, in several regions was seriously hit. Moreover, Last Thursday, Kremlin fired an intermediate-range ballistic missile in the city of Dnipro, with a warning that more would follow. While Russia's nuclear saber-rattling is unfortunately nothing new, firing experimental missiles with capability of carrying nuclear warheads at another member state is an irresponsible and deeply concerning development. Let me be clear. Such desperate attempts of intimidation are not going to work. President, the deepening involvement of Iran, the DPRK, and Belarus in Russia's aggression against Ukraine must stop immediately. DPRK's continued large-scale supply of artillery shells and ballistic missiles to Russia, and the involvement of the DPRK's troops fighting on Russia's side in Ukraine are a major escalation with global consequences. President, we also urge China as a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council with a particular responsibility to uphold the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, to exercise its influence to end Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, providing indeed peaceful tomorrow for Ukrainians. In addition, recent reports of Russia recruiting cannon fodder from Yemen to fight in Ukraine only further displays Russia's escalatory course of action. It is highly alarming that military and mercenaries from all over the world are being recruited to fight in the heart of Europe to satisfy Russia's neocolonial and imperial ambitions. President,
I just
the
told you,
developments that
Cuban
I
troops
and
in
many
there.
around this table have highlighted only confirm that Russia's goal in Ukraine have not changed. They don't want peace, but to erase sovereign Ukrainian state from the map and root out the national identity of Ukrainian people. This is not going to happen. We will not allow this to happen. We will stand with the Ukrainian people and reiterate our unwavering support to Ukraine's right for self-defense and Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. We call upon the UN membership to support Ukraine's peace formula, which is the only viable framework to secure a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in Ukraine, based on principles of the UN Charter. I thank you.
Okay. Again, let's take another little break, and we'll come back and dig into some more details on this, and as we work our way toward other top news stories of the day.
You know, someone very profoundly once said many years ago that if fascism ever comes to America, it'll come in the name of liberalism.
Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers. If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
The entire world is watching.
Every dictator, every crazy dictator in the world is watching. The world is watching. On TV, the entire world is watching. On social media.
But the entire world is watching, and yes, they are seeing what we have apparently bravely been willing to say that others are thinking.
Stand for freedom. Literally stand for freedom. Let's get this done. The entire world is watching.
We're at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind in his long climb from the swamp to the stars.
Maverick News. Maverick News. Maverick News.
Let me have more control of my own destiny.
The world is watching.
So, over the past year, Russia has experienced significant inflation. We've talked about, the inflation we've been experiencing here, very substantial, especially during the pandemic, especially right after the pandemic because of all the money printing. Things have come down. This inflation rate has come down here, though. And the official rate, around 2% now, which is the target that most Western countries aim for. Real inflation, obviously, I think higher than that because of the way it's calculated, but we're still within the range of the target zone, right? Well, in Russia, that's not the case. With the year-over-year inflation rate now reaching officially 8.5% last month. I looked it up. It's down slightly from 8.6% in September, but that inflation rate reflects a consistent upward trend from earlier in the year, with rates gradually increasing since March of 2023. For the past month, specifically for November 12th to 18th, inflation accelerated by another 0.37%, pushing the annual rate to a gain around 8.6%. That is very inflationary. And this indicates a monthly increase in consumer prices, contributing to the overall inflationary pressure. Now, with the crash of the ruble today, it's going to make things much worse. As the value of a currency declines, the spending power of a country's population, the citizens, it declines as well. And when you have a major decline in the value of a currency, in this case the ruble, it means everything that is imported is automatically going to be more expensive. And indeed, everything that you go to purchase will cost more because the money is worth less. Unofficial sources and analyses suggest that the actual inflation rate in Russia is probably much higher, which is also usually the case in the West as well, because governments always try to, sweeten things up and make things look better than they really are. For example, real inflation from September 2023 to September 2024 in Russia was reported to be as high as 22%. With food inflation alone surging by, get this, you thought it was bad at the supermarket here. When I took you shopping in Canada yesterday under Justin Trudeau, food inflation alone has surged over there over the past year, in many instances by as much as 70%. That's almost double throughout the year. And this discrepancy highlights the challenges in accurately measuring inflation. So in real terms, when you go to the supermarket in Russia, things have become much, much, much more expensive, much more so than here. And you're looking at an economy over there in Russia right now that is under a lot of pressures because of sanctions, because of military pressures, because of money printing. While Putin criticizes the West and says that the Western economies are falling apart, it's very clear that Russia is still very dependent on international trade, even with Western countries. Russia is still integrated into the Western economic system, the global economic system, because it isn't just the Western economic system. It is a global economic system. China, too. China owes all of its prosperity, honestly, to the United States because of Nixon bringing China into the fold. And we can get into the history on that. But if it wasn't for the United States and U.S.-based companies, corporations really investing by shipping or exporting American jobs to China and manufacturing, and Nixon encouraging China to become more involved in Western economic activity, and the decision by China to liberalize economic policies and bring more free market into their system. We can get into it another night, but what we're dealing with here is really a global economy. As much as Vladimir Putin and these other countries joining the BRICS are trying to isolate themselves in a way that allows them to essentially, I view it as kind of rebuilding the Berlin Wall, but putting it up all the way around the world to divide the whole world on an economic basis, which is a form of warfare, which is an assault on the Western economies. That in itself is escalatory in a very real sense. A very real sense. That is economic warfare. That's an escalation. And he can sit there and disingenuously say that BRICS is not anti-West when it's exactly what it is. That's what it is. It's an affront to the West. And it's not really much of an alternative because their system is very similar to what the Western economic system is. They've got a stock market, and we're seeing even today where I hear people talking about the Federal Reserve like it's some evil entity. What happened today in Russia as the ruble was tanking? Who intervened? The Russian Central Bank. Same darn thing. Time to open the other eye, folks. It's not as simple as NATO expansionism. Evil United States. It's all our fault. That's just an oversimplification of the entire thing, and ultimately, it's a Russian excuse to do what they are doing right now. You can disagree. Love to hear what you have to say in the chat. I'll read it as we continue with our coverage of this United Nations emergency meeting on the situation in Ukraine.
People's Republic of Korea.
Oh, let's listen to this. This ought to be really good.
Thank you, Madam President. Only a week ago, here in this chamber, the draft resolution reflecting the unanimous demand of the international community for immediate and unconditional ceasefire in Gaza was rejected by United States veto. The result was the rise of the abnormal situation of the throwing into darkness and despair the Palestinian people in their aspiration for survival and abetting Israel's nefarious atrocity of the mass killings. However, UN Security Council laid aside the most pressing security issue at the present time when we witness tragedy of merciless killings that could even make Hitler blush with shame. Overwhelmed by a high-handed practice of the one permanent member of the Security Council, it has convened a meeting that completely runs counter to the fundamental principle enshrined in the UN Charter. Now, this is truly disgrace to be condemned by international community. I strongly denounce the United States and its following forces and are calling for this another illegal meeting proceeding from their ulterior political motive to cover up the root cause of the outbreak and protraction of the Ukrainian crisis and deceive international community. As has been clarified on several occasions, the Ukrainian crisis was started by United States and Western forces that ignore a legitimate security interest and the right to territorial integrity of the Russia and pursued NATO's reckless eastward expansion under the ambition to maintain their hegemonic world order. It is none other than United States and Western forces that ruptured hard-won peace talks between Russia and Ukraine at the beginning of the event, and that caused and also the civilian casualty and prolonged the crisis by systematically supplying the various lethal weapons to Kiev authority, obsessed with the pipe dream to deal a strategic blow to Russia. Today, the Ukrainian crisis is plunged into almost grave and irreversible phase as present U.S. administration, nearing end of its term, has irresponsibly allowed the Kiev authority to strike area with Russia with the weapons supplied by it, and some Western countries followed suit. Ukraine invaded Russia's Kursk in August, killing numerous civilians. And recently, with public support from the United States and the West, it even went on to commit a dangerous crime of attacking Russian territory, using United States surface-to-surface missile ATACMS and UK air-to-surface cruise missile Storm Shadow. All facts give a clear answer to who is main culprit that further escalating Ukrainian war and aggravating tensions. Russia's counterstrike on November 21st is exercise of the just and legitimate right to self-defense and served as a serious warning to the US and Western countries in the war mania. The pressing issue to be addressed at the UN Security Council at the present is the act of undermining peace by the United States and its allies that are inciting confrontation and conflict among countries, while running amok to strengthen aggressive alliance and arms buildup driven by their ambition for hegemony. Just as fascisms in Europe and Asia collude with each other to throw the world into turmoil in the last century, the reactionary forces in the West and the East today, allied under the buttons of the United States, are now attempting to establish rapacious and tyrannical order across the world. The United States in particular is expanding nuclear-sharing military alliance system while escalating military pressure and provocation against the DPRK through deployment of its vast array of the strategic strike means and forces of the allies in the vicinity of our state. Such being the case, the United States is still picking hold on legitimate development of the relation between independent sovereign states by mastering its satellite forces. It cannot but mockery of an insult to the UN Charter. Under the Treaty on Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, which fully conforms to UN Charter and international law, the DPRK and Russian Federation are developing bilateral relations in all fields, including politics, economy, military, and culture, and maintaining contact with regard to each other's security and development of the situation. The DPRK will remain faithful to its obligation under the treaty and continue to strengthen and develop relations with the Russian Federation in order to defend fundamental interests of the peoples of both countries, contribute to regional and global peace and security, and realize international justice. The righteous international community should never tolerate such act of the United States in its followers that infringe upon the sovereignty and disturb the peace in their attempt to obstruct development of the legitimate friendly relation between sovereign states and impose tragic war and catastrophic disaster. Rather, it should run out in the struggle to safeguard justice and equity, peace and stability. I thank you.
All right, so it's not what he's saying, it's what he's not saying that should reveal to you more truth. We've been talking about North Korean troops being used by Russia. What did he not talk about? North Korean troops. He didn't say that they are, but he didn't say that they aren't. In North Korea, there's a country to be concerned about, and the United States obviously is. Donald Trump, very concerned about it in his last kick at the can as president, coming back in. A lot of focus on North Korea. And you know what they say? Always accuse the other side of doing what you yourself are doing when you want to confuse people, right? Like the whole biolab issue. Oh, Ukraine has all these biolabs. I don't know. Virtually every country has biolabs. I've seen zero proof, actually zero proof, that Ukraine was doing anything in any biolabs that was in contravention of any treaty or any breaking any international law or engaging in any kind of research within the biolabs that do exist or did exist within Ukraine, that they were violating anything. You know, the conflation there, of course, was that somehow they were responsible for the pandemic. No, I think that clearly, from everything we've seen, can go straight back over to a place in, as Donald Trump has said, the China virus. So you've got China, also part of this axis of resistance. Russia has its own biolab programs, very secretive. We don't know what the hell they're doing in there. North Korea is believed to have biolabs too. The specifics regarding their number and exact locations, also very secret. But intelligence reports that I've uncovered say that there are concerns and allegations from various intelligence assessments that North Korea has or is pursuing a biological weapons program, that they're using CRISPR technology to develop military bioweapons. Wake up, folks. You'd have to be naive to think that this kind of work is not going on. I'm not saying that the West is squeaky clean on this. There's too much secrecy. I have no idea. But I'm not naive enough to sit here and think that Putin and Xi Jinping and the North Korea, that they're all squeaky clean. It's clear that they are not. Historical reports and defector testimonies have mentioned facilities like the Pyongyang Biotechnical Institute, which could be involved in those kinds of activities. Defector accounts have also detailed experiments related to biological warfare. And then we're sitting here listening to this representative of North Korea at the United Nations sort of dance around, dodge the whole issue of troops, 10 to 12,000 North Korean troops coming to the assistance of Russia against Ukraine, involving another nation, just not really acknowledging it. But it's all our fault. I'm so tired of that. I'll hold all sides accountable. Doesn't necessarily make me the most popular live streamer around, but that's because I'm not just cheerleading. It's my job. Because I'm on your side. Even though some of you may not see it that way because you're cheerleading for one side or the other. And in this particular case, I think it's pretty clear that people have been subjected to so much of a one-sided narrative that their views are pretty biased. To the point where, and because people have lost so much trust in our institutions, and understandably so, I get it. But it's dangerous, folks. It's very dangerous. Because if you're blinded, even in one eye, you don't see both sides or all sides. You see, if you're seeing one side and you're acting against your own self-interests even and become self-loathing, that's exactly what I thought we were trying to push back against. Like 5, 7, 10 years ago, as our country was being torn down, in some cases from within. Not so much anymore. It seems like people want to destroy it. We've got people among us who are concerned about infiltrators and foreign interference, who are really doing the work for foreign actors. And we're seeing now these cracks in the Russian economy developing in a really serious way, all as Trump prepares to take office. He's going to come in there, and the dynamics within this conflict as he heads to, hopefully, the negotiating table to bring this conflict to an end, and I hope a positive way, where all sides can walk away at least somewhat satisfied, I guess, so that it doesn't reemerge as a conflict. We'll see what happens. Let's go back to this emergency meeting of the United Nations. Let me just I need a moment here while I get this thing queued up again. I'll be right back on the other side.
Maverick News. Fighting for freedom. Maverick News. The world is watching. Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals, defenders of individual rights and freedoms, credible, trusted, grounded in reality. Maverick News, Maverick News. Defending free speech, free speech. Donate at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Maverick News. The world is watching.
Okay, we're going to get into the good stuff now. Oh, yeah. Going to kind of cut to the quick. And this whole Korean soldier thing, we'll get to it. Here we go.
The representative of the United States has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give them the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I apologize for taking the floor a second time. I just wanted to make a very general point and ask a question, if I may. To be clear, the deployment of DPRK troops to help Russia carry out its illegal war of aggression against Ukraine and the Ukrainian people has fundamentally changed the nature of this war, posing not only a growing threat to Ukraine, but also an increasing threat to broader European security. The United States will continue to take, and its allies, to take all steps necessary to help Ukraine defend itself and to ensure allied security. And my last point is just a question to the representative from the DPRK regime. It's a very simple question, and I think this council would appreciate a very succinct answer. Has DPRK deployed troops to Russia? Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement. The representative of Ukraine has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give them the floor.
Well, thank you, Madam President. I'm not going to comment the pulp fiction by North Korea edited by the Russian mission. But I forced myself to stay in this chamber out of respect to this institution and out of the need to look in the eyes of the representative of DPRK to tell him directly that he represents a criminal regime, that he represents the regime that helps another criminal regime, and that by the end of the day, sooner or later, you and your leadership will end up in the dock. And sooner or later, your people will be free, and then we'll enjoy democracy and freedom and liberty.
I thank the representative of Ukraine for their statement. The representative of the Russian Federation has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give them the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. We regret the fact that the representative of the US is continuing to waste the valuable time of the Security Council, but listening to his conjecture and his smearing of countries that Washington doesn't like. Now, this is just the typical Anglo-Saxon thinking along the lines of highly likely. We repeatedly provided exhaustive clarifications. Our colleagues from DPRK today clearly laid out their position. So those who have ears, may they hear. Allies choose the path of escalation, and that is our conclusion. We see that from today's statements. They didn't want to talk about the real reasons for the wave of escalation, the green light that the Western donors of the Kiev regime has given to use long-range missiles within the Russian Federation. If the US and its allies choose this escalation, well, we're ready for that. But we would urge you to look at the very basis of common sense and have a long, hard think about the fact that we need a serious dialogue about the need to eradicate the root causes of the crisis. We've all engaged in that. So, our distinguished Western colleagues, the choice is yours. The whole world is waiting. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement. The representative of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea has asked for the floor to make a further statement.
Do you have troops there or not? They keep saying they
Thank
don't.
you, Madam President. I want to take a further reaction to the comment made by United States delegate. It is a legitimate right for DPRK to develop the relation with the Russian Federation. The treaty on comprehensive strategic partnership between DPRK and Russian Federation is fully conformed to international law and the UN Charter. Therefore, the DPRK will remain faithful to its obligation under that treaty. I thank you.
I thank the representative
Didn't answer
of
the question.
People's Republic
Again.
of Korea for their statement. There are
That's
no more
your
names
answer.
inscribed on the list of speakers.
That is your
Before
answer.
adjourning this meeting,
That is your answer. He asked a straight up question. Did you send troops? Do you have troops helping Russia? Are your troops there? Are they fighting? And what do we get back? A bunch of bafflegab. A bunch of avoidance. Just talking around the whole question. Didn't give an answer. Not acknowledging, not denying. That's your answer. They're there. Those troops are there. He just doesn't want to admit it. He can't say it because if he says that, it acknowledges that that is the escalation in a very serious way. Another country formally sending in troops, large numbers of troops, 10 to 12,000, and another 100,000 on standby. This pulls another country into the conflict. That makes it, takes it one step further toward a global war, a world war. That's the answer. But he won't say it there. Instead, he just talks like a politician. Just say some words, but don't answer the question. A direct question put to him, and again, he doesn't answer it. And I've had people in the chat over the last few nights saying, oh no, Russia says there are no North Korean troops there. And as I dig into it and I look, more and more evidence to show that there are North Korean troops there. And if there weren't any North Korean troops there, don't you think the guy would just come right out and say that they're not there? But did he do that? What would he have to lose by saying that, no, we don't have any troops there? What are you talking about? But he didn't say that. Disingenuous. All the way down the line. It's tiresome at this point. And I'm sorry. I'm not sorry, really. I'm only sorry that I was so forgiving in the beginning and so understanding of the NATO expansionism argument as it has been put to people, which seems to have some merit, but upon further scrutiny, and after seeing what has been happening over the past 2.5+ years, it doesn't stand up. Not at all. Just doesn't stand up. And even Putin's sanctions just make us stronger, and all these denials that the Russian economy is so strong that the Western sanctions don't matter. Oh, they matter. They matter. I've been looking and looking and looking. And this is, as Russia and these BRICS nations are positioning themselves to mount this economic attack, mount this new form of, or new wave of economic warfare on the West and free market capitalism. As they do that, we're seeing cracks develop in Russia's economy. So good luck with your BRICS, because over the past year, Russia's real estate market has experienced significant fluctuations, largely influenced by economic sanctions from the West, high inflation, which we've just talked about and explained why, and the cessation of generous mortgage subsidies from the government because they can't afford to continue them. The market saw a surge in residential real estate prices, with the average square meter price of new construction in the second quarter of 2024 reaching around 171,200 Russian rubles, while secondary market properties were at 110,100 Russian rubles. And this indicates a steady growth in both primary and secondary markets over the observed period, despite economic challenges. So they're pushing back against it, but we've seen the end of low interest mortgage programs in July, and that has significantly affected housing affordability, pushing many potential buyers right out of the market. Mortgage rates have increased, with some reports citing rates as high as 28%. Can you imagine a mortgage at 28%? You will never pay it off. And record high interest rates of 21%. I remember a time, for a period, back in the 90s, early 90s, I think it was, when interest rates, if you went to go get a car loan at a car dealer, you would pay somewhere in that range for like a car loan. I almost did it when I was a very young guy. And then I thought better of it, and thank God I didn't buy that car when I was young at an interest rate like that. That's when the economy was in a state where the government here was trying to cool things off because of inflation. So they jacked up the interest rates to extremely high levels. That's why interest rates go up, because the government is trying to get a handle on inflation. And the interest rates in the real estate market are now higher than they've been in decades, like since 99 in Russia today. And that's leading to a severe decrease in demand for new properties. Prices are just getting to be too high. There's been a noted downturn in the stocks of major Russian property developers. like the biggest ones. In fact, one of the biggest ones today, it looks like they might even go bankrupt, with losses up to 75% year to date. Some of those big companies reporting, indicating a potential crisis in the real estate development sector. The market has also seen a substantial increase in unsold apartment inventory, with 53 million square meters of new unsold apartments reported. Now, here in Canada, it's a little bit different. Just around the corner, a neighbor of mine put his house up for sale yesterday. Today, there's a sold sign on it. Different set of challenges here, but I'll tell you, the market here doesn't look like it's as bad as the situation they're facing over in Russia. So the last quarter of 2024 has seen a continued decline in the real estate market in Russia, particularly in the commercial sector. Investments in commercial real estate dropped significantly, with share prices of leading developers falling dramatically. And this period has been marked by a collapse in developer shares, with daily drops of up to 11% and monthly declines of 65% for some companies over the past 6 months. The luxury segment, while still active, has not been immune to the broader market trends either. High interest rates have made luxury properties less accessible, and commercial real estate has faced challenges with increased vacancy rates following the departure of Western brands. That's the impact that's only now being felt from Western economic sanctions. It has taken time. Sanctions don't have immediate impacts on economies, not in such a major way that it affects wartime activities. It takes time, especially when there are exemptions, as I mentioned earlier, ways for, in this case, Russia to kind of skirt those sanctions. So the Russian real estate market in the past year has been marked by extreme price growth, followed by affordability issues due to high inflation and mortgage rates escalating to crazy levels. And in the past quarter, the market has shown signs of severe distress, particularly in development and the investment sectors, with a notable decrease in buyer demand and a surge in unsold properties. This has a direct impact on Putin's ability to sustain his war effort. He has to pay for it. And if his economy is suffering, he can't afford to do what he needs to do. In addition to that, as I've been looking at Russian GDP, economic growth in Russia has only been somewhere around 1 to 1.5% per year in recent years. Even with wartime spending, he's shifted to essentially a wartime economy. And generally speaking, historically, any country that moves into a wartime economy, while there might be some negative repercussions on lifestyles for the general population, a wartime economy, as you're producing more and more for the military effort, it generally results in massive economic expansion. It's supposed to be good for the economy, but even as he's waging war against Ukraine, he's only getting like 1 to 1.5% growth. How do you do that? Now, you look at what's gone on in the auto industry over there, and that's here in North America, the auto industry has been, since the Industrial Revolution, a major economic driver. So too is it in China in a very major way. And it has been in the past in Russia, but with all those US-based, Western-based companies leaving the Russian market and leaving production behind in Russia, the Russian auto industry has undergone significant turmoil over the past 2 years. Yeah, even longer, since the beginning of this whole thing, due to sanctions imposed by the West. And those sanctions have led to a drastic reduction in car production, with 2022 being the worst year for the industry since the Soviet Union's collapse. They witnessed a 67% drop in production in 2022. That's because of the exodus of Western brands. Numerous international car manufacturers, Mercedes-Benz, Volkswagen, BMW, Toyota, Nissan, General Motors, they either suspended operations completely and exited the Russian market, or they or like they either left altogether or they suspended operations, waiting for things to return to, a non-war situation. And this led to significant contraction, both in production capacity and sales, and those companies at that time accounted for a large share of the market. You've got some Russian production there from companies like Lada, but it's been China now that has stepped in to fill the void. But that's creating a whole new set of challenges for Russia. This alliance, this economic alliance, the BRICS nations, as they try to fill in holes and deal with, the exodus of Western companies. China is moving in. Well, what do you think China does? They want to supply the whole world with electric vehicles. So Chinese car makers have filled the void, increasing their market share, though, dramatically. By right now, at this point in 2024, Chinese brands now control about 57% of Russia's car market. And this shift has been facilitated by the Russian government's incentives and the strategic partnership with China to bypass Western sanctions. But this is now creating a situation where Russia is beholden to China. And as these Chinese companies come in, it's making it more and more difficult for the Russian companies, manufacturers like Lada, to compete, because the quality is very good and their production methods are extremely efficient. And companies like BYD, which Warren Buffett is involved with, they're massive. They have huge economies of scale, not just in Russia, but globally, way more than a company like Lada. So the Russian government has introduced measures like state support for local production and incentives for domestic brands, like AvtoVAZ, which is Russia's largest car maker, saw some recovery in production, particularly towards the end of 2022 and into 2023, but it's still way below pre-sanction levels. And the past quarter has shown signs of stabilization and slight recovery in sales, with an increase of 61% in October of 2024 compared to the same period in 2023. But the market dynamics have shifted, and despite the recovery in sales figures, the industry faces challenges: high interest rates, increased disposal fees, and the overall economic environment has dampened consumer demand. So even though they now have the production side coming back online, the market is still heavily reliant on state support, government programs, subsidies, tax breaks, blah, 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 to maintain growth, with forecasts suggesting a possibility of reaching, I don't know what level they're going to get to in the next year. There's been significant distress among car dealerships in Russia, with reports indicating that nearly a third might actually collapse within a year due to plummeting profits and a 37% drop in car loans in October of this year, last month. 37% drop. That's more than a third. Not good. China coming in, Russia, Putin hoping that Russia or China can kind of bail them out of their economic woes. And in fact, what's happening is China's kind of taken over. And the Russians can't compete. And what they've had to do is they've also had to adopt some Chinese manufacturing techniques. They're scrambling, trying to find a way to cope. That's just the numbers. Those are the facts. That's not a bunch of hyperbole, propaganda. That's just straight up information. Much of it provided by Russia, the Russian government itself, which always tries to sugarcoat things and make things seem better than they really are. As bad as things may seem here, when I'm looking at what's going on over there, it's much worse. Even in the face of everything going on with all this military production that they're supposed to have going on, it seems like much of that might be smoke and mirrors too. In fact, I think it's pretty clear that it is. That Russia is not producing everything that they say they're producing in terms of munitions, which is why they're turning to countries like North Korea and Iran to get munitions and drones and now even troops. And it is true that they're bringing in troops from all over the world, mercenaries. I've seen the interviews just in the last week and a half with soldiers from Cuba. They are there. I've seen it on social media, and it's not from Western propaganda sites. This is from pro-Russian sources. So there's no question, those troops are there. Do not go away. More ahead right after this.
He's a fighter. He's a survivor. President Trump, defiant, strong. He is determined to make America great again. Pay tribute to the 45th President of the United States with this collectible t-shirt from the Maverick News Memorable Moments collection. Even a would-be assassin's bullet could not stop him. Instead, he emerged with his fist in the air ready to fight. For freedom. Get your Trump Fighting for Freedom t-shirt with any donation of $30 or more to Maverick News. There are 2 iconic artistic designs to choose from. But there is only one way to get these. Donate at freedomreporters.com. Support free speech. Free media. Support Maverick News. Call 1-866-248-1490 or order online at supergeeks.tv.
I'm going to save the mystery of the Red Baron for our last story this evening. And for those of you who are looking at me through a critical lens tonight, and that's fine, or, you know, how come you're being so hard on our hero, Putin? It's fine. I'll balance it out a little bit at the end. You'll see. You'll see. But let's move on to a couple of other stories tonight, because there are other things going on that are pretty important. Now, I know that this is going to concern some people. And have you seen this story about Trump's cabinet picks being targeted with threats and even threats of swatting? You know what swatting is, right? Where they make someone makes an anonymous phone call to police and they say, "There's an armed gunman in a house over here, and you better get somebody over there right away." And then the cops show up with their guns ready, and it puts the person inside at risk when in fact there's no emergency there at all. Well, that's what swatting is. And apparently that's what we've had going on with some of Trump's cabinet picks targeted. Here's an NBC report on that tonight.
Opposition spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt said several of President-elect Trump's cabinet picks were targeted in a series of threats ranging from bomb threats to swatting. Back with us from West Palm Beach is NBC's Kelly O'Donnell. Kelly, what more do we know?
Well, it certainly is an indication of the volatile political environment we are in, that people associated with President-elect Trump and his team have in some way, shape, or form been targeted, according to the transition. What they're saying is that a number of people, they're not naming names, but people who have been selected by President-elect Trump to work alongside him or in his administration come January have been targeted for some kind of threat. So far, based on what we have been able to find out, there has not been any actual threat, meaning any actual concern about any potential harm to these people, but obviously fear is a tool. So federal investigators will be responding to this, local law enforcement would be responding to this, and the campaign is limiting, now the transition, limiting what they are saying about this, but also wanting to make it known that this kind of a threat environment exists. Obviously, this comes in a long political season where former President Trump was the subject of 2 attempts on his life. And now we see that after the election and with his coming administration, people attached to him are the subject of potential doxing or attacks being ascribed to their home or their residence or their office, that kind of thing. We don't have the particulars yet because the Trump transition is not giving the specifics. That, of course, is in part for their safety as well as an investigation underway. We have seen this kind of hoax activity in the past, and law enforcement has been able to work through its understanding of computer systems and so forth and all of their investigative tools to identify suspects in unrelated cases. And certainly there will be plenty of work to do this holiday week to try to address this instance, which, as we understand it, happened in the last 24 hours or so.
Okay, so I'm curious, what do you guys think of this? It's, I think this is a reflection of the fear that is out there of the Trump administration, of Trump himself. People worried. Gina's back. Oh, I haven't seen Gina around here in a long time. I so miss Gina. Welcome back, Gina. I see you in the chat. Great to have you here tonight. Great to have you here. And Choosy. Great to have Choosy here, too. Always kind of likes to dial things back and keep it peaceful. I like that. Yeah, and it's the fear that I think is fueling a lot of this, right? People are afraid of Trump. On the other side, his political opponents, Democrats, progressives, liberals, they don't like him because they're afraid of him. They don't know what he's going to do. He is unpredictable. Very unpredictable. So unpredictable, some people think he's going to seek, like, revenge when he takes office. In fact, here, check this out. Here's another headline. I'll use NBC again. This is not the only place reporting this tonight, though. Here it is here. D.C. protested Trump's first term. Now Washingtonians worry he'll crush them in his second. Yeah. It says here Donald Trump has attacked many American cities. Yeah, whatever. But as president, he'll have direct authority over only one, his once and future home of Washington, D.C., where city leaders are bracing for his wrath and hoping for the best. Trump's first term was treated like an unwelcome nuisance in the Capitol, where more than 9 out of 10 voters rejected Trump at the polls every time he ran for office and protested him and his officials almost constantly. But ahead of Trump's return to the White House, District of Columbia officials fear losing their tenuous grip on the limited self-governance they have painstakingly achieved over decades, since Trump has repeatedly vowed to, quote, take over a city he describes as a, quote, filthy and crime-ridden embarrassment to our nation. Well, it's a government town. How else would you describe government? Well, not long ago, Washington officials hoped for full statehood. Now they simply want to preserve their ability to elect their own leaders. Okay. You see where it's going. But at the same time, there is some truth to this because Trump and his picks for cabinet are making it clearer and clearer that they are going to hold some people accountable for things that have been done during the Biden administration. Case in point, they say that the people responsible for the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan, they're going to be held accountable, and they're making a list. So you can see why some people are fearful. You can see why some people might be so afraid that they would facilitate or even engage in themselves the kind of activity that we saw here with the swatting and the threats. This is the big leagues, man. This is the presidency of the United States and the administration that goes with it. One group of people losing power over what is supposed to be, probably is, the most powerful nation on the face of the earth. And another administration coming in that is diametrically opposed on many, many, many levels. And yet somehow I wonder how much things will ultimately change, particularly as it relates to foreign policy. We will find out very, very soon. Of that I am certain, because I think we're now less than 2 months away from Trump moving into the White House again. Now, I said that I wanted to save this story about the Red Baron. The return of the Red Baron. Oh, man, yeah. Okay, so what's this all about? Over the past, 24... Almost like this was yesterday, this story emerged about a Ukrainian biplane attack. A biplane that was reportedly turned into a drone and then was flown some 900 miles across much of Russia to attack an oil refinery. Well, I'm going to just tee this up for you, and I'll tell you the truth about this when we come back on the other side. Stay with me.
The information war is raging. Truth without integrity is worth nothing. Maverick News. Because those who have power and those who seek it must be held accountable.
The world is watching.
Join our family of truth seekers. Donate today and add your voice to the chorus of Maverick Knights. Donate at maverickdonations.com. Truth. Integrity. It's the Maverick way. Maverick News. The world is watching.
Okay, when I heard this story, I started to laugh because it really, when I first heard about it, I just thought this is hilarious. If it's true, it's hilarious, and even if it isn't true, it's still a hilarious story. So, what's this about? It's about this plane, this biplane spotted in Russian skies that we were told is a biplane turned into a drone. So low tech, very low tech, only moves around like about 60 miles per hour. I mean, it's not even as fast as the DeLorean that hit 88, but here it is. And so this plane, the reports coming out were that this biplane was turned into a drone.
Полетел.
And then was sent into Russia to attack an oil refinery, flying some 900 kilometers, unmolested by any kind of Russian air defense. And then we were told that it actually hit this oil refinery and caused substantial damage. However, it seems the return of the Red Baron, there it is, there's another picture of this biplane. It's a biplane. It seems that the return of the Red Baron may have been exaggerated. I guess the thing was spotted. The reports are surrounding it are a little bit murky, but It looks like this plane was not a drone. As it turns out, there were concerns in Russia ultimately about this plane because it appears it kind of veered off course and went into restricted airspace near this oil refinery. And there was like actually a pilot in this thing, and it did fly all this distance, but it went off course and only by about a kilometer or whatever into restricted airspace. And they did take shots at it. At least these are what the reports are, but they missed. Okay, they missed this biplane. So the Red Baron just barely escaped by the skin of his teeth, whoever the Red Baron is in this case. And no, I don't think that it was the same kind of plane the Red Baron flew in World War I. It turns out it was some sort of a, well, I don't know what kind of a plane it ultimately was, but some sort of like a Russian or some sort of a Russian biplane is what it ultimately was. And I'm not familiar enough with Russian models of biplanes to know what the heck is going on. But it turns out that there was actually a drone attack on these oil refineries, and this one in particular was also targeted, I believe, overnight, but the biplane wasn't actually a factor. But it would. This is where I'm going to balance things out, okay? Because I can tell you that I did see some pro-Ukrainian, pro-NATO, pro-Western influencers grab onto that story, and man, did they run with it. That's what also made it kind of funny for me, because some of these guys picked it up, they treated it like it was just gospel, that it was true, that you had this plane that was flying across Russian airspace without any kind of challenge, that it just, this old biplane was all that it took to defeat Russian air defenses, which they say are virtually non-existent. And this thing was then used to attack this oil refinery. Not quite exactly what happened. So I don't know if they were being duped or if they just picked up on this story where there was confusion. There were reports right within Russia proper where people said, this plane is a drone. So the source of the information came from Russian sources, or appears to have come from originally Russian posts online, and then amplified by pro-Ukraine, pro-West, pro-NATO, pro-US, pro-UK influencers and online social media accounts. But since early 2024, Ukraine has ramped up long-range drone attacks against oil refineries inside Russia. Now, I know that Putin doesn't like that. The pro-Russian people, like, Ukraine's not supposed to hit us back. We get to punch them, but no punchbacks. I'll tell you this. You come to my country and you launch an attack here, it only makes sense that we would punch back in your country. Wouldn't you? I mean, if country X launches missiles at country Y, wouldn't country Y normally launch missiles back at country X? It just defies logic to not do that. And yet that's really what Ukraine has been facing since the beginning of the conflict. Restrictions on how they're supposed to be using weapons. You can only fight within your borders, and Russia's allowed to launch as many missiles at you as they want from within Russia, where you're not allowed to fight back. Well, enough of that, said the Ukrainians as they went into Kursk, which I frankly didn't see coming. And man, has that set off a storm, huh? Well, they've also been targeting oil refineries. And I know that they've hit, I know back as early as April, the stats that I've been able to come up with, they'd hit as many as 24 oil refineries. And this is also contributing to the pressures on the Russian economy. Russia's trying to bolster its air defenses around critical infrastructure, like oil refineries, bridges, etc. But the effectiveness of it has been spotty. It's true that Russian air defenses are not as strong as they would have us believe, and Ukraine has been able to capitalize on that, knowing full well that if you can undermine the integrity of your adversary's economy, you have a much better chance of success militarily, because they lose the ability to pay for all the things they need to pay for, including munitions and even their social programs back home, where it can create, undermine support for the war effort among the domestic population. If people, even in a dictatorship, if the people don't support the government will be no more. You got to have economic stability. If you don't have a stable economy, you don't really have much of a country. That's why Trudeau in Canada is offering everybody $250, which you'll get after the holidays, and he's supposed to be giving everybody a break on sales taxes. Yeah. Even that seems kind of disingenuous, doesn't it? And they tabled that GST holiday legislation today in the House of Commons. They're calling it the Holiday Consumer Relief Package. And it's been split in half, I guess, to be dealt with in two different votes, I guess. Jagmeet Singh still propping up that Liberal government, but he's taking steps to suspend this freeze on parliamentary procedures to allow a vote to take place on this, because the Liberal government, of course, hamstrung, or they've kind of tied everything up in the House of Commons, because they're not willing to release documents related to this green slush fund issue, which is huge. And the Liberals are trying to avoid accountability on all that mysterious money surrounding the slush fund. So let me take a little break. Maybe we'll get into a little bit more of that on the other side of this. We are getting near the end of the broadcast for tonight, though. So hang with me, and I'll return on the other side.
Maverick News. The world is watching.
Okay, so anyway, we're keeping an eye on that. That's not settled yet, the whole sales tax thing, and that all relates to inflation and affordability, and the Trudeau government kind of doing a juggling act there to to kind of buy votes, I would say, over the holidays as we work toward what I think will be a spring election, because it looks like Jagmeet Singh is ultimately going to end up stabbing Trudeau in the back on this and other issues. I think Trudeau's just hanging on by the skin of his teeth. He's trying to hang on, but we are, I think, on the verge of an election. It won't happen in the winter. They don't like to go to the polls in the winter. It affects voter turnout. It'll be spring, I think. I don't think they're going to go the distance, just because I don't think the government can hang on that long. So we'll see if it passes. Not there yet. Interesting turn, though. It's Trudeau's sly way of trying to take the wind out of the sails of Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, who has been campaigning on economic issues and axe the tax. Well, here we go with Trudeau axing the tax, the sales tax, over the holidays for a 2.5 month period. But it's temporary, and it won't offset, ultimately, the increased cost of living and the administrative costs as well that will accompany this measure. It makes no sense. We'd just be further ahead if he would just cut the taxes and just let people keep the money, rather than take the money and then set up a whole bureaucracy to then turn around, do the calculations, and give you some of it back. I think it will end up costing, I've seen estimates that it'll cost like over $300 per person per check that they write, in order to give you $250 back. And that's all tax money that ends up being wasted. But I guess that in itself is a make-work project for people. But ultimately, it doesn't really add to the real productivity of the nation. Now, there are a lot of ways to expand the economy, and one of the ways that the Trudeau government has done that is through liberalization of drug laws. They've tried to expand the economy by legalizing marijuana, and now you have operations like Fun Guys, which have been pushing the envelope, pushing things even further by opening all these different locations. I believe Fun Guys opened like some 30 different locations in places in Ontario, Canada, where they've been selling magic mushrooms and psilocybin. But all that has suddenly changed. I have to say that, yes, we've spoken about this on the program in the past. I am opposed. I don't think this is the last thing that we need in our communities. I've been opposed to the one here in my hometown of Chatham, Ontario. Here, I'll show you a picture of the location, but these now are all being shut down. In fact, I think today is the day when the operator of said Fun Guys locations in Ontario went ahead and shut all 30 locations down. And why has he done that? It's because they've been raided by police some 120 times. Now here's a picture of Fun Guys. This is the downtown Chatham, Ontario, Canada location, which today I know the doors were locked. Nobody inside, phone disconnected. And it was past Friday, the operator of these locations did make a statement saying that they're all being shut down. So if you want your fix, your magic mushroom fix, you're not going to be able to get it from Fun Guys anymore. And when I see the homeless problem here in my town growing as it is, I have to say, I'm not sad to see it go. They had other locations I know Windsor, Ontario had one, Cambridge, Ontario. And the operator says that these locations were not making money. Not making money. So here are the locations. Cambridge, Brantford, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 in Toronto. Brampton, Richmond Hill, Wasaga Beach, Chatham, Welland, Sarnia, Barrie, St. Catharines, Niagara Falls, Hamilton, London, Ottawa, Windsor, Montreal, and Scarborough. How has it been possible for someone to set up an illegal business like that with 30-some locations across the province of Ontario and have them continue to operate for the length of time that they've been open? Like, how long have they been up now? They've been around for at least, what, a year, 2 years? I'm not sure how many. I'm not sure how long ago they all opened. It's over a year, for sure. I think probably closer to 2. Anyway, they're all gonzo now, all shut down, not making any money. Okay, goodbye. Not sad to see you go. Well, that's my personal view on magic mushrooms and psilocybin. Yeah, and I think too many young people getting their hands on stuff in there in particular. Another main reason why wasn't a fan of those places. I saw too many kids hanging around outside as I would make my way downtown. So you know what's going on. And I hope the guy don't come back. So that gets us, I would say, to the end of tonight's Maverick News broadcast. Really appreciate you guys hanging with me tonight. I'm going to give you a choice. I'm going to give you a tune. A choice of tunes to take us out of the broadcast tonight. What do you want to hear? Do you want to hear Putin Nukem or Free Dog? I can play the DeLorean Magic 88 song. I've got that one queued up too. So 3 choices for you. Or Little Black Corvette. I have that one too. From our various Maverick and the News Brothers collections. I just need somebody to tell me what you want to hear as we wrap things up for tonight. Looking in the chat. Tell me what you want. Just give it a minute here to get a response. Just looking for a response. What do you want to hear? Hang on a second here. I see something else coming in, so maybe we won't sign off just yet. Just give me a moment. Gonna take a little break. We might continue this broadcast, so I'll tell you what, I'll run. I could play the grocery song. I'm going to run the grocery song again. Midnight grocery run, because we've been talking about inflation. Not just here on the home front where it's way too high, but also over in Russia. So we have something in common. Our governments on both sides are screwing everything up.
Under neon lights after 24/7. Cereal boxes stacked like they're from heaven. Cartwheels squeak while hearts untucked. Past the pickles and we're straight up struck. Midnight grocery run, feeling so divine. Bananas in the basket and we're losing track of time. Laughing through the aisles with you right by my side. This midnight grocery run's a wild ride. Frozen pizzas and a chocolate pie. Scanning items neath the starry sky. Fluorescent glow makes everything so real. In this wonderland we break the seal. Midnight grocery run, feeling so midnight thrill. We dance down our four like no one sees. Just some dreamers lost in fantasies. Midnight grocery run, feeling so divine. Bananas in the basket and we're losing track of time. Laughing through the aisles with you right by my side. This midnight grocery run's a wild ride.
One more tune because I'm looking at something and I'm not sure if I need to report on this or not, so stick with me.
Putin's got a plan, sitting in the Kremlin, dreaming of the days when the Soviets were winning. Ukraine's on its way out, NATO in its sight, but its soldiers keep retreating from the fight. Putin, you got a thing, you can't stop. Putin, you got a war hanging up, the world's on edge, he's losing his game, but he's ready to light up the flame. Putin, you got a shot, you gotta fight. Putin's grim, this is broken if you investigate, you cannot view. Putin, his plans unravel, he goes bruised. The West won't budge and his allies refuse, but instead of retreat, he doubles down. The Russian clouds is his final crown. Putin, you got a reason's gone. Putin, you got he sings his swan song. The whole world's watching, hold his breath while he dances with the devil of death. Putin, you got 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 you got Putin, you got Putin, you got Putin, you got.
No, the information that was coming in doesn't appear to be current, as far as I can tell. So a bit of a false news alarm there at the end of the broadcast. But hey, it was sort of exciting. Now, if it turns out to be something, I'll sign back on and bring you whatever the major development is. It was to do with Vladimir Putin, but I don't think it's actually current. So we will see. And one way or another, I'm still convinced that we'll be here tomorrow, alive and kicking, and bringing you closer to the truth at 7 p.m. Eastern. See you then. Love you guys. Catch you on the flip side.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.